Hello, namaste. Welcome to Dev's Hammer Show. This is the weekly English talk show and a flagship program of Indigenous television and ITV Nepal. In this weekly talk show, I invite guests from different countries and continent to discuss about the contemporary issues that is affecting Indigenous peoples. Sometimes in these programs, I do online interviews, sometimes face-to-face interview as well. Today I have a guest from Mexico. She has been visiting Kathmandu, and I have invited her to talk about the indigenous peoples of Mexico in Mexico and to share a cup of tea. Her name is Bia'ni Madsa. She comes from Ayuk and Binija indigenous community. And Mexico obviously is another one of the diverse country, and we have not talked earlier about the issues of indigenous peoples of Mexico. So I have a very good friend who is in town, and I have invited her to talk a little about the indigenous peoples of Mexico. And she has been working with one of the renowned organizations that actually works more than many countries. Even this year, she shared in background that she has been directly working with more than 40 different countries and communities around the world. So I have invited her to discuss about the indigenous peoples issues of Mexico in general, and indigenous peoples movement or issues that she has been overseeing for past couple of years around the world. So let me welcome first Bia'ni Madsa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dev. Thanks for inviting me, and namaste to the people that are watching this TV.
So to start with our conversations, or before going into our conversations, could you please introduce yourself? As I say, a short name, Bia'ni Madsa, and Ayuk and Binija, your indigenous community. But could you tell me a brief about yourself and your indigenous community in short?
Course. I am Bia'ni Madsa. Those are my names, and every name I have is from my mom, which is Bia'ni. It means light, from my Dijaza language, and Madsa means star, is from my dad's side and is from the Ayuk language. I also have surnames, last names, which are Juárez and Lopez, but as you can hear, they are very colonized last names because we have been colonized as well from the Spanish conquerors. So, but my names, my parents decided to give new names that is not very common in Mexico. We don't have, because we had tried to look like just Mexicans, not indigenous, because of their racism. But now there are some people like me, like my parents, that want to put in front in our names the identity we have. I can see also happily that here in Nepal also there are people with indigenous names, and I really like that because we are very diverse. I am from the Oaxaca state, which is I think kind of similar with Nepal. We have very diverse people, and in Mexico in total we are 68 indigenous peoples recognized, but within that we speak many languages. If we try to count really the people by the way we are, we could have easily close to 400 indigenous peoples, because even though, for example, I am Ayuk and also Binija, within those cultures we have diversity as well, and we cannot communicate with other Ayuk people or other Zapotec people. So that is my background from my family.
Bia'ni, as you just said about the surname or identity, and from your onward, in Nepal we have, as you said, or you observed that at the last name we have a culture of putting the our community's name. Just like my name is Tej Kumar, the first or second name, and last name is Sunuwar. So we have a friend or technician who has Tej Rai. Tej Rai, right? Rai is indigenous community. like Pasang Sherpa or something. At last, is community's name. And as you said, you also have similar practices. And but again, you shared that there is a culture of putting Spanish name at last, and Spanish colonizations or culture has been adopted, and that has actually created problem given that. And could you just relate me how the identity is framed, or the giving of last names?
Yeah. Well, it is not easy because usually we have very Spanish names, like Juárez Lopez. Those are my last names. And when Mexico was built as an state, we were forced to choose a last name. So it's why my family has those last names, but we cannot really go back in time and see exactly what was our last name. I believe because there are very few communities in Mexico that keep their last names, but no, it's not really common. There are, for example, the Maya people, there are some communities that keep their last names, but for us it's not. It's why my parents wanted to put in our names, my siblings and I, our identity. And for me and also the people I know with indigenous names, it had been hard because, for example, in my names we use apostrophes, and it had been hard in the documentation. The government doesn't want to accept that in our writing we have different symbols, and they misspell my name all the time. Once I have a very, let's say, funny memory. Once the government just erased my name and changed my ID number. So every person in Mexico have an ID number, and they erase it and change it because they assume that my names were wrong, because they don't recognize. They want people to be called like common names, Spanish names. And it had been a struggle for documentation because I have, for example, for passport or other documents, they always misspell my name. So I think it's still a small fight we are doing with names, because I know from my generation there are more people using indigenous names, but that is not something that it was used, and we face racism because of that.
So as you told when you introduced yourself, that in Mexico 68 indigenous communities have been recognized as indigenous peoples out of 400. In Nepal also, out of 125 ethnic and caste groups, 59 have been recognized, legally recognized and defined by indigenous, the government itself. And I want to hear that in Mexico, as you said, 65 ethnic and caste group have been recognized. Is that legally recognized, or has the government defined or recognized legally, or people themselves actually are claiming? What is the position or status of indigenous peoples of Mexico?
In general, in the country, it is recognized now. We are named in the constitution. It was after a very big fight because every right we have, it had been very hard to get. The government haven't give us something for free. And after a big movement in 1994, the government accepted that we exist and we were included in the constitution. After that, there had been a lot of also struggles, and it is different in every state. In my state, in Oaxaca, we are recognized as independent people and we have autonomy over our land, our local governments, but that is not the case in other states. So still the federal government doesn't want to give the recognition over the collective land and also collective power, and I think those are the most important things we have, and we still want to keep fighting to get that recognition in general. And the other thing is about the number of people, because, for example, there is a special one community as well. I know that here is the Rai people. In Mexico, there is the Mixtec community. So it's one of the biggest population, is the nationality, but within the Mixtecs, there are more than 60 varieties of languages. And there are some that you cannot even understand the language between them. And so there is one community that already won the independence, so they are not called Mixtec as well, because that is the general name. So, for example, I introduce myself as Biniza and Ayuk, but in Mexico, the more common use name for us given by others outsiders is Mije for Ayuk and Zapotec for Biniza. But I prefer to use my own identity name because that is the right way to go. So if you ask other, let's say Zapotec people, they are not only Zapotec. We understand we are siblings, but they can be Shitza, they can be Beneshon, they have their own names. So I think it's important to keep fighting for that, because it's just not good trying to put us all together. We are a big, diverse people.
From your explanations, I sense that in Nepalese indigenous peoples also share similar stories, as you said, that the Mexican indigenous peoples are racially discriminated, and in Nepal also the indigenous peoples of Nepal also say that we have been racially discriminated, linguistically discriminated as such. So I think we have similar background as such in terms of a struggle. And I want to know a bit more in detail about the linguistic diversity as well. And why I'm talking is, as you said earlier, that after a long fight, the Mexican government actually has recognized to some extent about the indigenous peoples of Mexico. Let me give you background. In 2020, when there was official closing of 2019 International Year of Indigenous Languages, it was the Mexican government or Mexican president which hosted a week-long conferences for the official closing of this International Year of Indigenous Languages, and the Mexican government actually had taken initiative to develop an action plan for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. That means Mexican government seems a kind of serious in addressing the indigenous people's language in this time, and we are keenly looking into the Mexican government initiative. Could you just tell us a kind of linguistic diversity and the indigenous people's position or recognition of their languages in constitution or in education in other sector?
Yes, I cannot say the government is not doing some things or efforts. I need to accept that there are some advance in contrast to other countries, because we have a special budget, for example, special institutions for indigenous languages, indigenous issues at the national level, but still there is just some small efforts. Because if, for example, related to language issues, if the projects are not run by the own community, is not going to be completely successful. So there are many projects that are started, but also I think still needs to be another type of recognition. I personally don't work a lot in linguistic topics, but I have very good friends and a lot of people working in that, indigenous people. So what we say is, until racism in institutions and other parts is not finished, we are not going to just be named like, oh, you are a nice person and you speak like in a cute language and you dress cute, but if you are not giving the rights we deserve, it is just like folkloric, I don't know if I explain myself, but I think to summarize, there are some efforts from the government, but still we need to have the autonomy to run those projects in order for them to be successful. Because, for example, in education, we have some schools that are indigenous schools, and also they teach a little bit of the language. In paper it looks good, but in reality what is happening is that the Spanish is the main language, and now we have most of the schools teaching English, but not giving the same level of importance to the indigenous languages.
We have also similar, stories. In Nepal, government is trying to give education, or at least in a paper, we have the government has adopted laws, policies, and regulation as well, which has emphasizes to give education into different indigenous languages in paper. But in practice, we are still struggling. And as you said clearly that you have not yet worked in the language area, but as you have said me in background that you have been working closely with, even this year that you have been working with more than 39 or 40 different countries and indigenous communities around the world, and you have come across the indigenous people's issues from these diverse countries as well. So I want to hear the cultural survivals, your work in the Keepers of the Earth Fund that you manage, and the issues that you have been working around the world, and what is the similarities you find, and how you are working with these different communities in different countries.
Well, I first feel very blessed to be part of the team, but also to have the opportunity to know, because every year and in every project we fund at the Keepers of the Earth Fund, we learn a lot. I especially learn a lot. So we are in the countries we have a lot of diversity, and as you mentioned, we have been funding projects in more than 30 countries, and I need to have a list now, an updated list of the numbers of indigenous peoples, because there are many more, not just the countries. And what I can say, we have sadly a lot of similarities in the problems we face, but also we have a lot of similarities in the good things. So related to the bad things, I had seen that there are a lot of pressure from the states, the countries, the federal governments to erase the diversity we have and to take our resources. I think that is one of the main things, the problems, the territory issues. As I could see as well here in Nepal, the water is taken, the rivers, the forests, the minerals, the land is taken from communities, and we have been doing that not just in Nepal, in Mexico, in Brazil, in a lot of countries. The rights are not respected, our autonomy is not respected, and that is sadly very general for all indigenous peoples in almost all the world. But related to the good things, I think we have been keeping our traditions. We have a lot of knowledge as well related to the environment. We have collective power, and we keep working on that. I think it's an example for the world to have not the democratic system. We have another system that is more collective, related to the power, but also related to the managing the land, taking care of the land. And we have respect for each other, for our elders. We have a lot of values that I think are very important. And those values and that knowledge made us survive until now, even though we conquer and a lot of the pressure that they try to erase us in many places, we're still here. So I think we have a lot of power, and also a lot to teach as well to other people.
One of the challenges that indigenous peoples have is having access to the fund, and as you said that you manage a fund called Keepers of the Earth Fund. I think indigenous peoples organization in Nepal are keenly looking for a funding as well. And could you just tell in brief what sort of funding is it, and to what extent you fund on, or what sort of issues you are funding, or when this fund is open, and how the indigenous peoples of Nepal or indigenous peoples organization can access to the fund. Could you tell in brief about this?
Of course. So we are a small fund. We have been funding up to $5,000 per year. There are small projects that we prefer to be in small communities as well, and that can be planned, administered by the own indigenous peoples, and to serve and help indigenous peoples and the whole community as well. So those are the important points we take into account when we choose a project. And the thing that I like is that we don't say what you need. The communities that are living in their places, they know what they need, and they can plan whatever is the most important issue at the moment, or also the answer, because we know we have several problems or several ideas we want to do, but let's just choose one for this year. And before we had an open call for proposals, it was online and everybody could apply, but we had built a very big database, and we really, in our own organization, even though we grant many communities, we don't have all the resources that we may like. So now we are inviting the people that applied before. But still we keep having and building new relationships, and you can send an email requesting for more information at KOEF at cs.org. Sorry, maybe you can add that later in the information. But we keep receiving applications, and we can have a very friendly conversation about this. We like for the small communities to apply, and I know that it's kind of hard because sometimes we think we cannot access to several funds. But also what I had learned is the power of the communities. When they want to do something, they just do it. And I know that there are several issues that we can help with. We are happy to help, but the power is still in the organization, in the communities.
That was all about the funding, and as we have been discussing about the issues that you have been looking into, or the indigenous peoples of Mexico which are facing. And I know, being a manager, you have traveled to many countries around the world, and you have observed with, and as you are in Nepal for the visit, and could you just share your observations, the indigenous people's issues here in Nepal and the countries that you have actually traveled, and what is the differences, or did you find any sort of differences in terms of positions, or the indigenous peoples of Nepal and other countries that you have so far traveled and observed?
Yes, well, I'm very happy that we could see different indigenous territories in this trip. And what I can see is that as well, again, the federal governments and mega projects are taking into the land and resources of indigenous peoples, and that is very sad, because all the amazing rivers and forests that we had seen in this trip are there because indigenous peoples had taken care of them. And to me, it's just amazing how there is no recognition about that, and there is no consultation. And also is very similar with other places, because recently I had just visited Brazil, and there are similarities as well with mining projects, hydropower projects, and other types of projects. But what I can see here is, and the advantage is that there are very strong communities, and I think you can, even though it seems very hard, the problems, you can keep organizing. I really believe, and I saw in many places, that the community and collective organization is the way to go. Because if we are like single people trying to fight, that is very easy to lose the battle. But as communities, and more important as nationalities, because here you are very well organized by nationalities, and you have common communication within the peoples, I think you can just use the power you already have, and not wait for the government to just say that yes, they are going to respect your rights. Because as I mentioned, in every country I had visited, or every project, we haven't received things for free. we won, and it took a lot of work and a lot of time to be accepted. Just we have international rights now, but that took many, many years. It's not for free, and we should use it.
I like your message that united we can stand and we can win. And also another message that you have said that indigenous peoples, now we are not weak. Our rights have been protected internationally. So we can stand and do advocacy to guarantee our rights. And I had so many questions to ask you and to know about deeply more about the indigenous peoples issues or the campaigns in Mexico. But then because of time constraints, I cannot talk more or take more time. At last, I would like to just request you if you have other messages or anything else that you want to emphasize on that the questions that I haven't asked or you want to tell.
Thank you, Dev. First, just thank you for inviting me and also for accompanying us in every place we have been. It's really nice to see because Nepal is maybe not a very known country outside or maybe from Mexico, but it's amazing to see how well organized you are, all the work you have been doing with the radios and the indigenous peoples here that are very proud. I really like that. I felt like at home during this time, and I just want to say that you keep working, and communities is the most important power we have, and you don't feel alone in your fights because you have other brothers, sisters, indigenous peoples in different countries, and maybe you can just learn a little bit about the other fights we have faced, similarities as well, but there are many communities that won those fights, so just keep looking for that and keeping the community strong.
Thank you, Bia'ni Madsa, for sparing some time to visit to Indigenous television and to share your observations and sharing the issues about the indigenous peoples of Mexico.
Thank you.
So today I actually had invited Bia'ni Madsa, who comes from Ayuk and Binija indigenous community from Mexico. She's also one of the young indigenous rights activists, and she especially working or providing a small grant for indigenous peoples around the world, and as she was visiting in Nepal to observe the situation of indigenous peoples, issues and the struggle they have been facing. And with this, I have come to the end of the show. If you have any queries in regards to this program or any other programs at Indigenous Television, you can reach us at the Indigenous Television at gmail.com. Next week, I will come up with new guests to discuss on new or other type of contemporary issues about the indigenous peoples. By then, have a nice weekend. Namaste.